Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. Among fans of the Harry Potter books, there's hardly any disagreement. The movies, no matter how spectacular they were, lost an enormous number of important details. Sometimes key scenes were simply cut, and sometimes they were changed beyond recognition. Today I want to go over several such moments that played a huge role in the books but were simplified, or disappeared entirely, in the films. Enjoy the video number 1, Tom Riddle's backstory. One of the greatest injustices of the film adaptations is how they treated the main villain of the entire story. In the films, we only see young Tom at the orphanage, but we never learn about his origins or his path to becoming who he was. Viewers were never told that his mother Merope bewitched his muggle father with a love potion. The history of the Gaunt family, filled with cruelty and obsession with blood purity, was never shown, and yet this very background predetermined Riddle's fate. Almost nothing is said about his search for Horcruxes either, nor about his cold, calculating mind. As a result, viewers just see a bad guy, whereas in the books we're shown Voldemort's psychology and the true depth of his darkness. Number 2, the Marauders. Another missing layer is the story of the Marauders. The map exists, but its creators seem to have vanished. The films never explained who Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs really were, why they created the map, or why Lupin recognized it instantly. Without this, viewers lose an entire layer of emotional connection between generations. James Potter, Sirius, Lupin and Pettigrew remain mere shadows of the past, even though their story is directly tied to Harry himself. Number 3, Neville's parents. Neville Longbottom turned out to be a very bright character in the films, but the most touching and important part of his story was cut out. In the book, there's a scene at St. Mungo's Hospital. Harry, Ron and Hermione accidentally run into Neville while he's visiting his parents. They had been tortured into insanity by Death Eaters and could never return to normal life. This episode would have allowed viewers to understand Neville's character more deeply, his inner strength and the tragedy he carried. On top of that, the chapter also features Gilderoy Lockhart and gives a rare look into magical illnesses. None of this made it into the films. Number 4, the importance of Dobby. In the books, the house elf Dobby is one of Harry's key allies, but in the films his role was reduced to the bare minimum. For instance, it was Dobby who showed Harry the Room of Requirement, where Dumbledore's army secretly met. He also helped Harry during the Triwizard Tournament by bringing him Gillyweed for the underwater task. And the subject of house elves in the books was much broader. We also meet Winky, and Hermione even starts an organization to fight for their rights. All of this was cut, stripping the story of an extra layer of depth. Number 5, the Half-Blood Prince. The movie The Half-Blood Prince is often called one of the weakest in the series, and much of that comes down to how its central mystery was presented. In the books, the theme is revealed gradually, building suspense, but in the film it was reduced to a single line from Snape. I am the Half-Blood Prince. No explanations, no backstory. As a result, viewers who hadn't read the books couldn't understand the importance of this moment at all, and book fans felt like they had been robbed of an entire storyline. Number 6, Peeves the Poltergeist. Peeves was chaos given form, and Hogwarts would not have been the same without him. In the books, he swooped through corridors, dropping ink bottles, pulling rugs, and singing rude rhymes at the worst possible moments. Teachers hated him, but the students loved him. During Umbridge's reign, Peeves became an unlikely hero. Fred and George's parting words, "Give her hell from us, Peeves," were obeyed with glee. Rowling described how he saluted them, then went on to unscrew chandeliers and smash vases until Umbridge was driven mad. The films erased him entirely. Without Peeves, Hogwarts lost part of its soul. His mischief was more than comedy. It was rebellion, resistance in its purest form. When the school stood under tyranny, Peeves was laughter turned into a weapon. By cutting him, the movies stripped away a piece of the castle's living character, leaving Hogwarts quieter, tidier, and far less alive. Number 7, The House of Black and Creature. Grimmauld Place, number 12, was more than just a secret hideout. In the book Order of the Phoenix, it breathed with history. The walls were lined with portraits of the Black family, proud, pure-blood supremacists who despised Sirius for rejecting their values. The tapestry of the family tree showed scorched-out names, including Sirius's own. "My mother blasted me off after I ran away," he told Harry, pointing to the blackened hole where his name should have been. This was no safe house. It was a prison of memories for Sirius. At the center of this tension stood Creature, the Black family's house elf. He muttered insults under his breath, calling Sirius a blood traitor, and clinging to the memory of his mistress. His hatred played a fatal role. By leaking information to Narcissa and Bellatrix, Creature became partly responsible for Sirius's death. The tragedy was not just in Sirius's fall through the veil, but in how deeply his own house and servants symbolized the chains of his past. Rowling made Grimmauld Place a battlefield of family and loyalty. The films reduced this complexity to a backdrop. Creature was little more than a shadow, his importance erased until Deathly Hallows. The family tapestry was barely shown. The conflict that defined Sirius, the battle between who he wanted to be and the family that cursed him, never reached the screen. Without it, viewers lost the chance to see Sirius not only as Harry's godfather, but as a man forever haunted by the home that should have protected him. Number 8, The Battle of Hogwarts in detail. The Battle of Hogwarts in the books was not just a clash of spells. It was a desperate stand where every creature and every ally took part. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick led defenses with ferocity. House elves, led by Creature, stormed into battle with kitchen knives, crying, "Fight! Fight for my master, defender of house elves!" Centaurs fired arrows from the forest, turning the grounds into chaos. It was a war that involved the whole magical world, not just a handful of duelists. The deaths were given weight in the text, and they struck like blows. Fred Weasley's death shattered readers. In the middle of laughter, in the heat of combat, he fell. Rowling wrote, "Fred's eyes stared without seeing, the ghost of his last laugh still etched upon his face." Lupin and Tonks lay side by side in the aftermath, their hands almost touching, leaving behind their infant son. Each loss reminded the reader that victory came with unbearable cost. The films compressed this into spectacle. Explosions and duels filled the screen, but the quiet pain was gone. The bravery of the house elves never appeared. The centaurs remained silent in their forest. Fred's death was shown, but without the depth that made it unforgettable. Lupin and Tonks were simply found dead, without the tragic tenderness of the book. The scale shrank, and the emotion dulled. What could have been the heart of the finale was reduced to flashes of light and smoke. Number 9. Fleur and Bill's Romance. Fleur Delacour entered the story in Goblet of Fire as the dazzling champion of Beauxbatons, admired for her beauty, but often dismissed as shallow. Yet the books revealed another side of her, one that the films barely touched. When Bill Weasley was mauled by Fenrir Greyback during the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, many expected Fleur to leave him. His face was badly scarred, his future uncertain. Even Molly Weasley doubted her devotion. But Fleur's reaction silenced everyone. "You thought I would not wish to marry him? Because of these scars? I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think," she declared. That moment defined her character. Fleur was not a vain girl chasing a fairy tale romance. She loved Bill deeply and refused to abandon him when he needed her most. Her loyalty and courage shone brighter than any Veela charm. The scene also healed tensions within the Weasley family. Molly, moved by Fleur's words, finally embraced her future daughter-in-law with tears in her eyes. What could have been a story of rejection became a story of unity. The wedding of Bill and Fleur in Deathly Hallows was a symbol of that bond. Their celebration brought together witches and wizards at a time of growing darkness. It was a fragile moment of hope, one that reminded readers what the characters were fighting for. In the book, their love stood in stark contrast to the hatred and violence spreading across the wizarding world. It gave emotional weight to the tragedies that followed. The films, however, gave Fleur and Bill almost no time. Their relationship appeared suddenly without context or depth. Viewers never saw the scars, the confrontation in the hospital wing, or Fleur's powerful declaration of love. What should have been one of the most human and heartfelt moments of the series was reduced to a forgotten detail. Without it, Fleur was left as a background figure, and Bill never received the story he deserved. Number 10. The political side of the Triwizard Tournament. The Goblet of Fire was not only about a dangerous tournament, it was also about politics on a global scale. When Durmstrang and Beauxbaton arrived at Hogwarts, it was more than a show of magical skill. It was diplomacy. These schools represented the wider wizarding world, and their presence carried tension and pride. Igor Karkaroff, headmaster of Durmstrang, brought with him the shadow of his Death Eater past. Madame Maxime of Beauxbaton embodied elegance, but also suspicion. Every glance, every word between them and Dumbledore was loaded with meaning. The book made this clear. After Harry's name came out of the goblet, outrage filled the Great Hall. Karkaroff's reaction was not just anger at unfairness, it was political. "This is a plot, Dumbledore," he thundered. For Durmstrang, Harry's unexpected entry looked like a manipulation, a way for Hogwarts to seize victory. Even Madame Maxime questioned the fairness, showing how fragile trust was among the schools. The Triwizard Tournament, meant to promote unity, revealed just how divided the wizarding world really was. Beyond the schools, the Ministry of Magic played its part. Cornelius Fudge wanted everything to look perfect, a polished picture of control. But the cracks showed. Barty Crouch's strange behavior hinted at corruption and secrets. Ludo Bagman, eager and careless, represented the Ministry's incompetence. Rowling used these characters to show that politics was everywhere, even in what was supposed to be a friendly competition. The tension between nations and leaders gave the story weight far beyond the tasks of the maze or the dragons. The film stripped this away. What remained was a sporting event with a dark ending. The distrust, the diplomacy, the fragile alliances, all of it vanished. Without the political layer, the story lost much of its richness. The audience never saw how Voldemort's return would threaten not just Britain, but the entire wizarding world. The book warned that the fight ahead was global. The movie made it look like it was only Harry's battle. Number 11. Ariana Dumbledore's story. Ariana Dumbledore's story begins in silence and ends in tragedy. As a child, she was attacked by Muggle boys who saw her performing magic. Terrified and broken, she could no longer control her power. Aberforth later explained, "It drove her mad. It exploded out of her when she couldn't control it." Their mother, Kendra, kept Ariana hidden, trying to protect her from both the wizarding world and the Ministry. But one accident changed everything. Ariana's uncontrolled magic killed Kendra, leaving the family fractured and in pain. This wound shaped Albus Dumbledore. At the moment when he should have stepped into greatness, he was tied to the responsibility of his sister. Then came Gellert Grindelwald. The brilliant young wizard shared Albus's dreams of power and change. For a short time, they imagined ruling together, reshaping the world for the greater good. But Ariana was at the heart of their downfall. In one of their heated arguments, magic burst out in every direction. Ariana was caught in the middle and killed. No one ever knew whose spell ended her life. Aberforth never forgave Albus. He confronted him at Ariana's funeral, raging that Albus had chosen ambition over family. Albus carried the guilt until his final days. "I was gifted. I was brilliant," he confessed to Harry. "But I was arrogant. I was cruel. I let Ariana down." The pain of her death haunted him, turning his brilliance into caution and his dreams into regret. It explained why he hesitated so often, why he feared power, why he could never face Grindelwald without shame. The films offered only a passing reference to Ariana, but the books gave her story weight. Without it, Albus appears only as the wise headmaster, untouchable and distant. With it, he becomes human. A man scarred by grief, chained by mistakes, and defined by the sister he could not save. Ariana's tragedy was not just the Dumbledore's secret, it was the key to understanding why the greatest wizard of his age feared his own greatness. Number 12, Firenze and the Fate of the Centaurs. When Professor Trelawney was dismissed from her position in Order of the Phoenix, Albus Dumbledore made an unexpected choice. He invited the centaur Firenze to take her place. For the first time in Hogwarts history, a creature from the Forbidden Forest stepped into the role of teacher. The moment was striking. Students walked into the transformed classroom where the ceiling shimmered with constellations. Firenze spoke not with fear, but with calm authority. "I know what is foretold. I teach you to read the heavens as we centaurs do." His presence, however, caused turmoil among his own kind. The other centaurs saw Firenze's decision as betrayal. They believed that to work for humans was to bow before them. In the Forbidden Forest, Bane spat his fury. "You have chosen a side, Firenze, and it is not ours." The scene captured the pride of the centaurs and their unwillingness to be drawn into the politics of wizards. In the book, this rejection gave Firenze a tragic dignity. He was an outcast, punished for trying to build a bridge between two worlds. Through Firenze, J.K. Rowling gave readers a glimpse of the arrogance of wizards and the cost of prejudice. Students like Harry and Hermione quickly respected him, but the larger magical society did not. Centaurs were proud, independent, and unwilling to cooperate. Wizards, in turn, treated them as mere creatures. This tension made Firenze's role symbolic. His very presence in Hogwarts was a reminder that the wizarding world was bigger than the narrow human view. The films erased this story entirely. Without Firenze, the audience never saw the conflict between centaurs and humans, nor the courage of one centaur who chose to help. His shimmering classroom under the stars, his exile from his people, and his quiet wisdom vanished from the screen. What remained was a hollow gap, where readers knew a bridge once stood. A bridge between the forest and the castle, between pride and humility, between two worlds that never truly learned to understand each other. Number 13, Percy Weasley's Ambition. Percy Weasley's journey in the Harry Potter saga is one of the most overlooked threads in the transition from page to screen. In J.K. Rowling's books, Percy's arc is filled with tension, betrayal, ambition, and ultimately redemption, serving as a powerful reminder that the war against Voldemort was not only fought with wands, but also with choices that tore families apart. Yet in the films, his rise in the Ministry of Magic and his painful rift with his own family was stripped away, leaving him as little more than a background character. To understand what was lost, one must dive back into the books where Percy stood as a cautionary figure, proof that the lure of authority and recognition could fracture even the strongest bonds. From the very beginning, Percy was painted differently from his siblings. While Fred and George thrived on mischief, Ron struggled with insecurities, and Ginny grew into quiet strength. Percy set himself apart by clinging to rules, titles, and the promise of respect. He was the prefect, the head boy, and the one who cared deeply about being recognized by authority. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, this trait began to shift from a harmless quirk into something dangerous. Rowling wrote, "Percy was sitting at the staff table, looking very smug indeed. His work as an assistant to Bartemius Crouch Sr. gave him a taste of real power, and he relished it, distancing himself from his family's usual skepticism toward authority." The fracture became undeniable in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. When Cornelius Fudge refused to believe that Voldemort had returned, the Ministry launched a campaign of denial and propaganda. Percy, eager to rise in the ranks, aligned himself completely with Fudge. This was not merely a matter of workplace loyalty. It was a full rejection of the Weasleys' values. Molly Weasley, who had always dreamed of her children being safe and united, received a letter from Percy that made readers recoil. He wrote to Ron, warning him to sever ties with Harry. "It is time for you to examine your loyalties, Ron. I say this as a brother. You are associating with a very unstable element." This moment shattered the illusion of unity among the Weasleys and revealed Percy's willingness to betray blood for ambition. Percy's betrayal was more than a simple political stance. It was an emotional wound to his family. His alignment with Fudge meant that he saw his own parents and siblings as dangerous radicals for supporting Dumbledore and Harry. The Burrow, usually a place of warmth and love, became haunted by his absence. Fred and George, quick to mock, now spoke of Percy with genuine anger, and Arthur Weasley, despite his calm nature, could not hide his disappointment. Rowling's decision to highlight Percy's rejection of his family underscored a truth about war. Sometimes the battle lines are drawn not just between good and evil, but within the walls of one's own home. The films reduced this complex arc to a faint outline. Percy is seen in his prefect robes, briefly glimpsed in ministry scenes, and then suddenly reappears at the Battle of Hogwarts as though nothing had happened. What audiences missed was the gradual poisoning of Percy's worldview by ambition. His slow but steady climb in the ministry, his insistence on loyalty to Fudge, and his cruel dismissal of his parents' warnings painted him as a tragic figure, a man who sacrificed love for career. Without this storyline, viewers lost a key example of how Voldemort's return corrupted institutions and divided ordinary people. Percy was not evil, yet his blindness to truth served the Dark Lord just as effectively as any Death Eater's wand. In Order of the Phoenix, Percy's absence at Christmas burned particularly deeply. While the Weasleys gathered at Grimmauld Place with Harry, Sirius, and the Order, Percy was nowhere to be found. Rowling emphasizes Molly's heartbreak, writing, "Percy had not bothered to contact his parents once over the holiday." This silence spoke volumes. For a mother who knitted sweaters for each of her children every Christmas, the rejection was unbearable. It showed readers the devastating cost of blind ambition, not just the rise of a career, but the crumbling of the bonds that defined the Weasley family. Percy's estrangement lasted throughout Half-Blood Prince. While the Weasleys endured the terror of Death Eater attacks and the looming threat of Voldemort, Percy remained firmly at the Ministry's side. Even when Dumbledore died, Percy did not rush back to his family. His silence during this period was a symbol of how deeply ambition can blind someone to the truths around them. By ignoring the evidence of Voldemort's rise, Percy epitomized the danger of denial, a theme Rowling wove tightly into the narrative. It was not until Deathly Hallows that Percy's redemption came. In one of the most moving yet understated moments of the series, he returned to his family during the Battle of Hogwarts. Rowling describes the scene with a balance of tension and relief. And then Percy was shaking hands with his brother, tears pouring down his face. "I was a fool. I was a pompous fool." The raw vulnerability of this confession restored him to his family, though the scars of his betrayal lingered. It was not just a personal apology, it was a recognition of the value of love over ambition, truth over denial. Number 14, Rita Skeeter's Secret. Of all the threads woven into J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter series, few were as cunningly hidden and later as explosively revealed as the secret of Rita Skeeter. In the films, Skeeter is reduced to a caricature, a nosy journalist with bright green quills and a taste for sensationalism. But the books give her a far greater role, one tied directly to themes of truth, propaganda, and the abuse of power. She is not just an annoying reporter who writes unflattering stories about Harry. She is an unregistered animagus, capable of transforming into a beetle and eavesdropping on private conversations. That single detail changes her from a one-dimensional nuisance into a figure who holds the power to shape public opinion and, in turn, the fate of the wizarding world. Her first major appearance comes in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, where she swoops in like a vulture during the Triwizard Tournament. She writes scandalous articles for the Daily Prophet that twist facts into lurid tales. One piece describes Harry as a skinny boy with a tragic past, the disturbing signs of a restless and possibly dangerous mind. The films show these articles in passing, but they never explain how Rita manages to acquire such personal details. In the book, the mystery lingers until Hermione uncovers the truth. Rita is an illegal animagus. By slipping into beetle form, she perches on windowsills, creeps onto statues, and hides in hair, unseen but listening to every whispered word. This explains her uncanny ability to report private conversations almost verbatim. Hermione's discovery of Rita's secret is one of those moments in the series where her intelligence and perseverance shine. While others dismissed Skeeter's uncanny sources, Hermione suspected something darker. At the end of the fourth book, she catches the beetle version of Rita inside a jar. Rowling describes the moment with biting humour. Hermione had trapped Rita Skeeter, beetle form and all, in a small glass jar with an unbreakable charm. This revelation was both shocking and satisfying. It explained months of suspicious reporting and gave Hermione leverage to force Rita to stop writing damaging lies about Harry. Without this subplot, Rita's downfall in the films seems oddly incomplete, leaving her as nothing more than background noise. The films also overlook how critical Rita's pen later becomes in the war against Voldemort. During Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, the Ministry of Magic begins a campaign of denial, branding Harry and Dumbledore liars when they insist that Voldemort has returned. In the film, the burden falls entirely on Dumbledore's army and Harry's speeches to his classmates. But in the book, Hermione sees an opportunity in Rita. Despite despising her, Hermione recognizes that Rita's scandalous writing style could be used to spread the truth. The only way Harry's story would be believed by the public was if it appeared in a publication people read. That publication turned out not to be the Daily Prophet, which had become a ministry mouthpiece, but the underground magazine The Quibbler, edited by Xenophilius Lovegood, Luna's eccentric father. In this scene, Rita is practically forced into an uneasy alliance with the trio. She interviews Harry for The Quibbler, allowing him to tell the story of Voldemort's return, Cedric Diggory's death, and the events of the Triwizard Tournament without ministry censorship. Harry's words are recorded exactly as he speaks them. If you want to know what it's like to face him, imagine being very close to something that is emitting a very powerful evil. Rita's article, written with her usual sensationalist flair, spreads like wildfire. People who had laughed at Harry suddenly start questioning the ministry's narrative. This single article, dismissed by the films, becomes one of the turning points in the wizarding world's acceptance of Voldemort's return. The irony of Rita's role is one of Rowling's sharpest commentaries. A character introduced as a villain, petty, dishonest, and self-serving, becomes under pressure a vehicle for truth. Yet her cooperation does not come from moral conviction. She writes Harry's story because Hermione blackmails her, threatening to reveal her illegal animagus status if she refuses. The balance of power has shifted, and for once, Skeeter is the one forced into silence. Hermione's manipulation here is morally grey, showing her capacity to use underhanded tactics when justice is at stake. The films skip this nuance, missing an opportunity to show how. Hermione's intelligence often manifests in cunning strategy rather than brute force. Rita's secret also enriches the larger theme of hidden identities in the wizarding world. Animagi are rare and heavily regulated, their names registered with the ministry. Yet here is Rita Skeeter flaunting the law to gain advantage in her career. In this, she mirrors other characters who hide their true forms. Sirius Black, who survives as a dog, Peter Pettigrew, who betrays his friends while disguised as a rat. But unlike Sirius or Pettigrew, Skeeter uses her ability not for survival, but for exploitation. The revelation adds weight to her character and positions her within a recurring pattern. Those who conceal their identities wield disproportionate influence in the struggle between truth and deception. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the films show only fleeting glimpses of the media's role in shaping public opinion. Yet the books repeatedly emphasize how dangerous propaganda can be. By sidelining Skeeter, the films miss one of Rowling's most pointed critiques. The press is not neutral. It can be corrupted, manipulated, or, as in Rita's case, coerced into revealing inconvenient truths. Rita's sensationalist interview with Harry in The Quibbler demonstrates how narrative framing changes perception. Her words carry power because people are drawn to scandal, and even if she writes with her usual venom, the facts she records are undeniable. Without this subplot, the films leave a gap in understanding how the wizarding community shifted from disbelief to reluctant. Acknowledgement of Voldemort's rise. Number 15. Dudley Dursley's redemption. Of all the relationships left underdeveloped in the Harry Potter films, few feel as strikingly unfinished as the one between Harry Potter and Dudley Dursley. The books, with their careful layering of growth, bitterness, and eventual quiet reconciliation, gave space for this bond to evolve beyond the cruel childhood antics of number 4, Privet Drive. The films, in contrast, reduced the Dursleys to comic caricatures ushered off the screen after a few early appearances and then forgotten. This absence robbed audiences of an important moment of humanity that J.K. Rowling carefully planted in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, a moment that signaled not just Dudley's maturity, but the closing of a long, painful chapter in Harry's life. When readers first meet Dudley in The Philosopher's Stone, he is every bit the spoiled bully, overfed, indulged, and gleefully cruel to his strange cousin. The image is unforgettable, Dudley counting his birthday presents and complaining that 37 is 2 fewer than last year, Aunt Petunia rushing to promise him 2 more before the day ends. His fists and taunts accompany Harry's every childhood memory, a reminder that in this house, Harry is unwanted, unloved, and relentlessly mocked. This dynamic establishes Dudley not merely as background colour, but as a representation of the world's cruelty when it meets difference. By the time of the Order of the Phoenix, however, Rowling began weaving subtle threads of change. Dudley, the schoolyard tyrant, experiences his own brush with terror when Dementors attack him and Harry in Little Whinging. For the first time, Dudley comes face to face with a darkness that cannot be dismissed as Harry's imagination. His physical collapse and silent shock afterward hint at something deeper. An understanding, however small, that Harry's world is not childish fantasy, and that Harry himself bears burdens beyond Dudley's comprehension. It is the first step in a slow, halting transformation. The culmination of this growth appears in The Deathly Hallows, where Rowling presents a rare moment of tenderness from the boy who once tormented Harry daily. As the Dursleys prepare to leave Privet Drive for their own protection, Rowling writes, "He held out his large, pink hand. Harry shook it. Dudley mumbled, 'I don't think you're a waste of space.' Those words, so plain and clumsy, carry immense weight. For years, Harry had been reduced to nothing in Dudley's eyes, an oddity to ridicule. To hear Dudley admit otherwise is not only shocking, but profoundly moving. It is the kind of emotional closure that readers yearned for, a reminder that people can grow, however ungracefully, into decency. In the film adaptation, this moment was stripped away. The Dursleys were last seen stiffly departing their home, barely acknowledging Harry at all. The scene between Dudley and Harry was filmed, as actor Harry Melling once confirmed in interviews, but ultimately cut from the final version. Director David Yates explained that the pacing of the film demanded streamlining, and the Dudley moment was one of the casualties. The result, however, was a loss of depth. Without that exchange, Dudley remained fixed, in the viewer's mind as a cruel child who never changed, his character arc abandoned just before it reached its resolution. The missed opportunity is all the more glaring because Rowling clearly intended Dudley's words to echo beyond the page. They represent something rare in Harry's story, acknowledgement from his tormentors. Harry never receives an apology from Vernon or Petunia, and Rowling herself has remarked that Petunia almost offered a word of kindness, but could not bring herself to do it. Dudley, the least reflective of the family, becomes the one who manages to extend a hand, literally and figuratively. For Harry, whose life has been defined by rejection and neglect at Privet Drive, that gesture is not about reconciliation in a grand sense, it is about dignity. It affirms that Harry's suffering was seen, at least by one person, and that he mattered. The simplicity of Dudley's line is what makes it so powerful. "I don't think you're a waste of space" is hardly a sweeping declaration of love. Yet in the world of the Dursleys, where affection for Harry was non-existent, it lands with the force of a confession. It is awkward, understated, and deeply human. Dudley cannot articulate more, but in his limited vocabulary, this is an admission of respect. It reminds the reader that growth is not always eloquent. Sometimes it is stumbling, hesitant, and unadorned, but no less sincere. What makes the omission in the films especially painful is the fact that Harry's farewell to the Dursleys is not just about them, it is about Harry himself. Leaving Privet Drive is symbolic, marking the end of his years of invisibility and mistreatment. Rowling gives Harry this quiet closure so that he does not walk into the darkest year of his life burdened by unresolved bitterness. He leaves not with hatred, but with the knowledge that even within that cold house, something shifted. The films denied Harry this moment of healing, and in doing so denied audiences the emotional depth of his departure. Moreover, Dudley's change enriches the thematic fabric of the series. At its heart, Harry Potter is not only about magic, but about choice, the ability to grow, to resist cruelty, to choose compassion over hatred. Dudley's gesture, small though it may be, underscores that truth. He is proof that even those raised in narrow-minded, prejudiced households can begin to see differently. His mother and father never bend, but Dudley does. For readers, it is a reminder that humanity can emerge in unexpected places, that kindness can flicker even where it was least expected. Number 16, Crabbe and Goyle's role. In the Harry Potter films, Vincent Crabbe and Gregory Goyle are reduced to caricatures of bumbling sidekicks, shadows that cling to Draco Malfoy with little identity of their own. They serve as visual punctuation marks to Draco's sneers, lumbering behind him with dull expressions and an occasional grunt. Yet J.K. Rowling's books tell a more layered tale. These two boys were not merely comedic muscle, they were legacies of dark families, products of a world steeped in loyalty to Voldemort, and one of them, Vincent Crabbe, met a fate in the books that not only shaped the climax of Harry's story, but also symbolized the destructive consequences of blind allegiance to hatred. It is a storyline that, by being erased from the films, stripped away an important moral weight from the narrative's end. The novels make it clear that Crabbe and Goyle are not interchangeable, despite their similar roles as Draco's henchmen. Gregory Goyle is physically imposing and often portrayed as slow-witted, but Crabbe is given moments of dangerous curiosity. He is shown to be a boy who listens closely to the whispered conversations about dark magic that drift through his family's circle. In Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Rowling describes how Crabbe and Goyle stand guard for Draco, ready to repeat his words as if they were gospel, but there are hints that Crabbe is not entirely thoughtless. He notices, he absorbs, and he remembers his family's deep involvement with Death Eaters planted seeds that would later bloom with disastrous force. As the series progresses, Crabbe and Goyle are shown as more than mere background noise. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, the two boys take on the role of sentinels for Draco, guarding the entrance to the Room of Requirement as he struggles to repair the vanishing cabinet. Rowling writes, Crabbe and Goyle were hovering in the corridor outside the room of requirement, looking menacing and keeping watch for Draco. These small details remind readers that while Draco wrestles with fear and doubt, his two companions remain steadfast. They may not question his motives, but their loyalty is unwavering, and in Crabbe's case it grows into something darker, a loyalty not just to Draco, but to the violent traditions of the families who raised them. The culmination of Crabbe's arc arrives in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows when the trio, Harry, Ron and Hermione, enter the room of requirement to retrieve the Horcrux hidden there. It is here that Rowling allows Crabbe to step forward from the shadows. Unlike Draco, who hesitates at the edge of violence, Crabbe acts decisively. In a moment of reckless bravado, he unleashes the Fiendfire, a cursed flame of living magic that even the most skilled wizards fear. Rowling writes, Crabbe, in his panic, had set the place ablaze with a cursed fire, Fiendfire, that could not be controlled. This was no schoolyard hex, but a piece of ancient, forbidden sorcery, and it sprang from Crabbe's own hand. The Fiendfire scene is one of the most haunting images in the final book. Rowling paints it vividly. The fire was a tornado, a hurricane, a living, devouring monster. Within its flames, monstrous shapes twisted and roared, consuming everything in their path. It was Crabbe's last act, and it was an act of ultimate destruction. Unlike Draco, who hesitated to cross the moral line, Crabbe hurled himself into it with fatal consequence. His death was not just an accident, but the logical outcome of years of hatred, ignorance, and a fascination with power he could not control. This moment gave depth to his character, reminding readers that evil is not only in the great villains, but also in the reckless choices of those who follow them. The films erased this powerful arc, replacing Crabbe's role in Deathly Hallows Part 2 with Blaise Zabini. In the cinematic version of the Room of Requirement battle, it is not Crabbe who conjures the cursed fire, but instead Goyle, who inexplicably casts a spell he never knew in the books. Zabini is present to add another face to Draco's entourage, but the substitution strips away the tragedy of Crabbe's downfall. The scene becomes an accident of circumstance rather than the climactic, character-driven act of a boy destroyed by the very darkness he sought to wield. The audience loses the weight of irony. Crabbe, always portrayed as a thoughtless brute, meets his end by dabbling in magic, far too advanced for him, consumed by the fire he unleashed. The absence of Crabbe's story also diminishes the tension between Draco and his companions. In the books, Draco does not wish for Crabbe's death. He is horrified by it. His horror shows that despite his bullying and arrogance, Draco is not so far gone that he rejoices in destruction. When Crabbe dies, it is Draco who nearly perishes alongside him, saved only because Harry pulls him and Goyle away from the inferno. Rowling writes, Malfoy was screaming and struggling with Goyle, who seemed half unconscious. Both of them were on the floor, covered in soot and blood. This moment highlights the humanity of Draco and the cost of loyalty to dark paths. Without Crabbe's death, the films rob Draco's story of one of its most crucial turning points. Crabbe's choice of Fiendfire is not accidental within Rowling's design. The fire becomes a metaphor for Voldemort's ideology, seductive, destructive, uncontrollable. The boy who conjures it believes himself powerful, but in truth he is its first victim. Harry, Ron and Hermione survive not by brute force but by resourcefulness and courage, using brooms to escape the flames. The Horcrux itself is destroyed by the Fiendfire, consumed by the very evil that birthed it. It is Crabbe's act that inadvertently advances the hero's quest, though he never lives to see it. The symbolism is sharp. Hatred destroys itself while bravery endures. In contrast, the film version dilutes this symbolism into a spectacle. The fire rages, but it lacks the narrative roots that made it meaningful. By erasing Crabbe's agency, the movie reduces the scene to another battle sequence rather than a tragedy born of character flaws. It is one of the few times where the cinematic adaptation fails not through omission of detail, but through omission of moral consequence. Without Crabbe's fatal mistake, the story loses one of its clearest demonstrations of how Voldemort's followers, even the youngest, are devoured by the darkness they embrace. The novels also show how Crabbe and Goyle are not simply brainless minions, but young men shaped by environment. Their fathers were Death Eaters, their families steeped in supremacist ideology. Crabbe's recklessness with Fiendfire is the inevitable result of a boy who grew up hearing that dark magic was power, not danger. Rowling illustrates the tragedy of a generation poisoned before it could make choices of its own. When Harry reflects on Crabbe's death, he does not gloat. Instead, the narrative treats it as another casualty of Voldemort's reign, a wasted life consumed too early. The films, by contrast, never linger on this cost, leaving Crabbe and Goyle as little more than slapstick thugs. The overlooked significance of Crabbe's story also touches on the broader theme of agency among secondary characters. Rowling does not allow even the minor figures in her saga to escape the consequences of their choices. Crabbe's death is not heroic, but it is pivotal. It shows how one reckless act can alter the outcome of a war. In this sense, Crabbe stands as a cautionary tale, a shadow reflection of Harry himself. Both boys grew up in the shadow of larger forces, both were handed down legacies of power and conflict, but where Harry resisted, Crabbe surrendered. Their divergence marks the difference between survival and destruction. Goyle's survival in the books further underlines the contrast. Though he too is complicit, it is Crabbe's recklessness that dooms him. Goyle's fate is to be dragged to safety by the very boy he once tormented, Harry Potter. Rowling crafts this moment with symbolic precision. The boy who embodied cruelty and scorn is saved by the compassion of his victim. It is one of the many quiet moral reversals that ripple through the final battle, where love and mercy triumph even in the smallest exchanges. The films, by erasing this, leave Goyle's survival unexplained and flatten the intricate web of ironies that Rowling wove. It is telling that Rowling chose to give Crabbe such a destructive yet consequential role. In a series defined by choices, Crabbe's final act is a portrait of what happens when one chooses recklessness over wisdom, violence over restraint. His death in the roaring jaws of his own spell is not a side note, but a warning. To lose this in adaptation is to lose one of the sharpest commentaries on the dangers of dark magic. Viewers of the films are left with a shallow impression of Crabbe and Goyle as comic relief, missing the deeper tragedy that their story carried in the pages. Crabbe and Goyle may never have been heroes, but in Rowling's books their presence mattered. They were not simply set pieces to frame Draco Malfoy's sneer. They were mirrors of what happens to children raised in darkness, unprotected from ideologies that glorify cruelty. Crabbe's fiery end is the inevitable consequence of such a life, a death that burns not only him, but the illusions of power he thought he possessed. To see that erased from the films is to see a vital piece of Harry Potter's moral tapestry left untold, a reminder that in adaptation, sometimes the smallest stories carry the heaviest truths. Number 17. Gringotts and the Goblins' Distrust. In J.K. Rowling's books, Gringotts is not merely a place where wizards keep their gold. It is a symbol of deep-rooted tension between goblins and the wider wizarding world. The goblins are not simply background characters with crooked noses and sharp teeth. They are a proud, intelligent race who view themselves as custodians of their own culture, one that has been systematically dismissed and exploited by wizards. The films chose to highlight Gringotts only as an impressive spectacle, the marble hall filled with chandeliers and the thrilling escape on the back of a dragon, but in doing so they stripped away the centuries of mistrust that gave those scenes weight. In the books, every visit to the bank is tinged with subtle reminders of the uneasy truce between species. When Harry first sees the goblins in Philosopher's Stone, Rowling writes, "The goblin bowed them through a pair of doors into the vast marble hall. About 100 more goblins were sitting on high stools behind a long counter, scribbling in large ledgers, weighing coins in brass scales, examining precious stones through eyeglasses." It was more than an image of efficiency. It was the introduction to an ancient system that had its own rules wizards barely respected. The distrust is not born from nowhere. Throughout history, wizards have promised goblins rights and recognition, only to break those promises when power shifted back to them. This context is made explicit in Deathly Hallows when Harry seeks help from Griphook, the goblin, who survived imprisonment at Malfoy Manor. Harry, Ron, and Hermione need him to get into Bellatrix Lestrange's vault, but the interaction is layered with suspicion and old wounds. Griphook's reluctance is not about the risk of breaking into the bank, it is about whether wizards, yet again, are trying to exploit goblins. Rowling makes this tension clear when Griphook tells them, "I have no wish to be at the mercy of wizards." This one line carries centuries of bitterness. The films reduce Griphook's role to that of a reluctant accomplice, but in the novel his every word reminds the reader that goblins view wizards not as friends but as oppressors. The heart of the conflict lies in differing views of ownership. Wizards see objects, particularly wands and goblin-forged artifacts, as possessions to be passed down through families. Goblins, however, believe that the maker of an item is the true owner, and that the object should be returned to the maker upon the death of the purchaser. This clash is most clearly presented in the discussion of the sword of Godric Gryffindor. To wizards it is a relic of Hogwarts, a weapon imbued with heroism. To goblins it is goblin-made and therefore theirs. Griphook makes his feelings clear. That sword was not made for you. That sword does not belong to you. The films show Harry receiving the sword from the Sorting Hat in Chamber of Secrets, but they never take the time to reveal why goblins might see it differently. By neglecting this, the films miss the chance to show how divided magical society truly is, even when standing against Voldemort. This omission weakens the story because the alliance with Griphook is not a simple arrangement. It is one of the most morally ambiguous decisions Harry makes. He is forced to bargain, to offer something he cannot truly promise, knowing that betrayal may be inevitable. In the books, the scene where Harry agrees to give Griphook the sword in exchange for his help is filled with tension because Harry knows he is lying. The internal conflict is heavy. He is the boy who lived, who always tries to do the right thing, and yet here he is deceiving someone who has every reason to mistrust him. The film skips over this, portraying the goblin merely as a facilitator of the heist. Without this complexity, the audience never sees Harry's growth as someone who has to navigate moral grey areas. Gringotts itself is more than just a bank. It is a fortress designed to protect treasures against even the most skilled wizards. Rowling describes the tunnels twisting deeper and deeper into the earth, guarded by enchantments that make intruders feel heat, multiply their weight, or trap them in enchanted fires. The dragon chained at the lowest levels is not just a spectacle, it is a symbol of cruelty, of how even magical creatures are enslaved to guard wealth. Harry's escape on its back is not a triumphant cinematic set-piece alone. It is a desperate liberation, both for him and for the dragon. Yet, in the book, the dragon's suffering and the goblin's ruthless pragmatism are clear. They are willing to chain a beast underground for centuries to guard the treasures of others, because gold means power, and in their eyes, power is all they have left in a world that denies them equality. The betrayal that follows the heist is crucial to understanding the bitterness between wizards and goblins. After Harry and his friends break into the Lestrange vault and retrieve Hufflepuff's cup, Griphook turns on them, seizing the sword and leaving them to their fate. His betrayal is not the act of a villain, but the act of someone who refuses to be tricked again. For readers, it is a painful but understandable moment. Harry's deception comes back to haunt him, and it underlines a larger truth: alliances built on lies cannot hold. In the film, this betrayal happens quickly, almost as an afterthought, robbing it of its thematic resonance. Without the weight of history, Griphook's actions feel opportunistic rather than tragic. The neglect of the goblin narrative in the films also means that viewers never see the way Rowling used them to expose hypocrisy in the wizarding world. Wizards like Ron, who grew up in the system, echo prejudiced views without even realizing it. He casually mentions goblin rebellions in the same tone one might discuss a family anecdote, but Hermione reminds him that goblins rebel because they are oppressed. This subtle education of the reader is lost in the films, which never address goblin history. By silencing these voices, the films paint a simpler, more unified wizarding world, when in truth, Rowling's world is fractured and layered with conflict. Another crucial detail missing from the films is Bill Weasley's insight into goblin culture. In the books, Bill, who works for Gringotts in Egypt, warns Harry about the way goblins think. He tells him that they don't forget debts or betrayals, and that their sense of fairness is different from wizards. Bill's knowledge is not there to demonize goblins, but to prepare Harry for the complexity of dealing with them. This knowledge makes Harry's eventual bargain with Griphook all the more significant. It shows that he is entering dangerous territory, not just physically, but culturally. The absence of these explanations in the films reduces Griphook to a plot device rather than a representative of an entire marginalized people. Even the history of goblin rebellions mentioned throughout the books is stripped away in the films. Goblins rebelled multiple times over centuries, demanding fair treatment, wand rights, and respect for their culture. Wizards crushed these rebellions, and the Ministry of Magic painted goblins as greedy and untrustworthy. These details mattered because they revealed that Voldemort's ideology of pure blood supremacy was not the only injustice in the magical world. There were systemic inequalities long before he rose to power, and they would remain long after. The films, by ignoring this, present Voldemort as the sole source of darkness, when Rowling was trying to show that prejudice runs deeper than one man. The sword of Gryffindor itself becomes a metaphor for the divide. To goblins, the sword represents broken promises. To wizards, it represents heroic destiny. When Harry retrieves it from the pond in Deathly Hallows, the moment is personal and spiritual. But when Griphook takes it during the escape from Gringotts, it becomes political. His cry of triumph as he clutches the sword is not about greed. It is about reclaiming something stolen. In that instant, readers are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that their hero has not always been honest, and that justice looks different depending on who tells the story. The films also missed the chance to emphasize how Harry's decisions with goblins reflect his struggle with leadership. He is not just fighting Voldemort, he is navigating alliances, weighing morality against necessity, and making compromises that hurt him. The book's portrayal of Harry and Griphook's uneasy deal demonstrates the burden of command. Leaders cannot always choose the clean, noble path. The absence of this in the films flattens Harry's journey, making it less about hard choices and more about cinematic adventure. By ignoring the goblin narrative, the films also removed an important mirror to wizard society. Goblins are not perfect. They enslave dragons, they value gold above all else, but they are honest about their worldview. Wizards, in contrast, cloak their prejudices under laws and traditions. The tension between goblins and wizards forces readers to question who truly holds the moral high ground. Rowling was unafraid to show that her world was messy and unjust. The films, however, polished away those edges, leaving a cleaner, less challenging story. This gap between book and film becomes most striking when considering Griphook's final actions. After escaping Gringotts, he disappears with the sword, never to be seen again. His fate remains unknown, and that ambiguity lingers like a wound. Readers are left to wonder whether he considered himself victorious, or whether he too was just another pawn in a larger war. The films never allow space for this uncertainty. By ending his arc abruptly, they remove the haunting reminder that not every conflict is neatly resolved. Ultimately, Gringotts and the Goblins were never just about treasure or bank vaults. They were Rowling's way of forcing her readers to confront issues of prejudice, ownership, and exploitation. Their absence from the films left a hole in the story's moral landscape. The dragon still flies, the vaults still glitter, but the centuries of mistrust, betrayal, and uneasy bargains remain buried in the pages, unseen by the millions who only watched the screen. And in that silence, One of the most important lessons of the series, the reminder that injustice can persist even in times of triumph, was lost. Number 18. The importance of Quidditch. Of all the details that made Hogwarts feel like a real and breathing school, Quidditch stood at the center. It was not simply a wizarding sport, it was the heartbeat of student life, a spectacle that tied the houses together in rivalry and pride. Yet in the film adaptations of Harry Potter, Quidditch faded away after the third installment, reduced to brief mentions or not shown at all. What the movies neglected was how central Quidditch was, in the books, to the personal journeys of Harry, Ron, and Ginny. It was a narrative device that provided triumphs, humiliations, lessons in courage, and the texture of school days that did not involve battling dark lords. Without it, an entire layer of growth and atmosphere vanished. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, Harry's appointment as captain of the Gryffindor Quidditch team was not a casual subplot. It signaled his transition into a true leader, someone responsible not just for his own performance but for organizing practices, strategies, and dealing with the egos and fears of his teammates. Rowling writes, the truth was that very few of them had ever thought Harry capable of managing anything, and the new title of Quidditch captain was almost as much of a shock as if he had been made head boy. That responsibility forced Harry to mature in ways the films never captured. The audience only saw him as the chosen one in the battle against Voldemort, but Quidditch showed his humanity, his mistakes, and his ability to inspire others when the stakes were not the survival of the world, but the pride of his house. Ron Weasley's journey with Quidditch in the books offered one of the most relatable portraits of insecurity in the entire series. When he first became keeper, he was haunted by self-doubt, convinced that everyone expected him to fail. Rowling described him trembling before matches, sometimes as pale as nearly headless Nick. In Order of the Phoenix, the infamous "Weasley is our king" chant, originally sung by Slytherins to humiliate him, symbolized his vulnerability. Yet it later transformed into Gryffindor's anthem of victory when Ron proved himself. The films, by skipping this arc almost entirely, deprived Ron of one of his defining coming-of-age moments. His eventual triumph was not just about saving goals, it was about silencing the voice inside him that whispered he was always overshadowed by his brothers and best friend. Quidditch gave him his own identity, something no duel or battle scene could ever replace. Ginny Weasley, too, blossomed on the Quidditch pitch long before she and Harry ever became romantically linked. The books made clear that she was a natural athlete, bold and fearless. In Half-Blood Prince, when she replaced Harry as Seeker and led Gryffindor to victory, Harry felt a surge of admiration, not only for her skills, but for her confidence. Rowling notes, Ginny gave a dazzling performance, easily outstripping Cho. This was a crucial moment that shaped Harry's attraction to her. It was rooted in respect for her abilities and spirit. The films stripped away this foundation, leaving their relationship appearing sudden and underdeveloped. Had viewers seen Ginny soar across the sky, outmaneuvering rivals with determination, her connection with Harry would have felt earned rather than abrupt. Quidditch also served as a mirror of the school's social tensions. The hostility between Gryffindor and Slytherin often boiled over most fiercely during matches, where personal rivalries played out in the open. Draco Malfoy's constant sneers, his attempts to sabotage games, and his recruitment of an entire team of hulking beaters in Chamber of Secrets highlighted the sharp divisions at Hogwarts. Rowling captured the animosity perfectly. The Slytherin team were no longer 7 people, they were 7 trolls. The absence of these match-day clashes in the films softened the rivalry, reducing it to schoolyard taunts instead of battles of pride and cunning played out before roaring crowds. Beyond personal arcs and rivalries, Quidditch carried symbolic weight. For Harry, flying was his first taste of true freedom. From the moment Madame Hooch's whistle blew in Philosopher's Stone and he instinctively soared upward, Quidditch became an anchor of joy in a childhood overshadowed by trauma. His heart did a somersault, Rowling wrote when he first flew. On the pitch, Harry was not the boy who lived, but simply a seeker chasing a golden blur. That sense of liberation humanized him, grounding the narrative in the simple thrill of play. By erasing the later Quidditch matches from the films, the adaptations neglected to remind viewers of this fundamental part of who Harry was. The games themselves carried storytelling drama equal to any duel with Death Eaters. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the storm-lashed match against Hufflepuff when Dementors descended and Harry plummeted from his broom was a turning point in his relationship with fear. The quote, "He heard the rushing of wings, the howls of the crowd, and then nothing," burned into readers' memories because Quidditch became the stage where Harry's vulnerability was most exposed. This match was kept in the films, but subsequent moments of similar weight were ignored. Each skipped match represented a missed opportunity to see the characters tested in a different arena, where the enemies were nerves, weather, and rival students instead of dark wizards. One of the most joyful elements, Rowling wrote, was the way Quidditch united and divided houses in rituals that felt authentic to school life. Gryffindors painting banners, chanting songs, and erupting in wild celebrations after victories gave Hogwarts its pulse. When Ron finally had his great match in Half-Blood Prince and the Gryffindor common room roared his name, the book described an explosion of sound as he was lifted on shoulders, beaming through tears of disbelief. This was a moment of pure school spirit, the kind of memory that defines teenage years. Without Quidditch, the films showed Hogwarts less as a vibrant community and more as a dark castle haunted by battles. Even discipline and conflict around Quidditch fueled subplots. Harry's infamous lifetime ban from the sport in Order of the Phoenix after clashing with Malfoy was devastating for him. Rowling captured his grief with stark simplicity. It felt as though he had lost one of the best parts of his life. This was more than punishment. It was a symbol of how Dolores Umbridge was crushing students' spirit, stripping away joys to tighten her grip. The movies minimized this, presenting Umbridge as a tyrant only in the classroom, not as someone who dismantled traditions that made students resilient. Removing Quidditch drained away one of the clearest demonstrations of her oppressive rule. Another overlooked thread was how Quidditch shaped friendships and teamwork. Harry had to manage interpersonal frictions, from Katie Bell's injuries to Ron's jealousies and Ginny's rising talent. He learned that leadership meant making hard decisions, sometimes choosing who to bench or how to encourage a faltering player. Rowling detailed these moments with care, showing Harry's growth beyond instinctive heroism. In Half-Blood Prince, she wrote, Harry found that Quidditch captaincy gave him a new perspective on people. He began to notice things he had never paid attention to before. This kind of development was essential in preparing him to lead Dumbledore's army and ultimately fight Voldemort, but the films reduced his growth to a straight line of destiny, missing the subtleties of responsibility honed on the pitch. The sheer presence of Quidditch also balanced the darkness of the later books. As Voldemort's shadow lengthened, the ordinary joys of Hogwarts became more precious. Matches were moments when students screamed themselves hoarse, not out of fear, but out of excitement. The omission of these joyful interludes made the cinematic Hogwarts seem perpetually grim, as though every day was life or death. Rowling understood that to make darkness believable, there must also be light. Quidditch was one of the brightest lamps in her narrative, a reminder that even in war, children cling to games, laughter, and pride. One cannot overlook how Quidditch linked the wizarding world beyond Hogwarts. The World Cup in Goblet of Fire revealed the sport as a global phenomenon, complete with mascots, fandoms, and political undertones. That glimpse expanded the horizon of Rowling's universe, showing that wizarding culture was not limited to classrooms and castles. The film adaptation gave a fleeting shot of the cup before shifting entirely to the Dark Mark, discarding the spectacle that proved magic extended into cultural rituals and joy. What could have been a grand stage for world building became a mere prologue to darker events. It is important to consider that Quidditch was more than set dressing. It was a storytelling device that echoed the characters' internal struggles. Harry's need for freedom, Ron's battle with insecurity, Ginny's rise into confidence, the rivalry with Slytherin, the oppression under Umbridge, the sense of community in victory, and the discovery of leadership all unfolded through this sport. Rowling wove these threads so tightly that removing them diminished not just the school atmosphere, but the arc of the main characters themselves. The decision of the films to downplay Quidditch may have been practical, but it came at the cost of nuance, warmth, and the rhythm of school life. In the end, Quidditch was never about who caught the snitch or who won the cup. It was about teenagers learning to face themselves when thousands of eyes watched, about finding identity in cheers or jeers, about moments of joy that made the shadows bearable. The books made it clear time and again that Hogwarts was not only a battleground against Voldemort, but also a school where friendships were forged, where victories were sung late into the night, and where flying through the air chasing a golden speck meant more than survival. It meant being alive. Number 19, Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks' love story. Of all the characters whose journeys were condensed or almost erased in the Harry Potter films, few suffered as much as Remus Lupin and Nymphadora Tonks. Their story in the books was layered with pain, hesitation, courage, and ultimate sacrifice, yet the films reduced their relationship to brief background moments. In the novels, J.K. Rowling presented their love as a quiet but powerful subplot, full of tension between fear and hope and ultimately emblematic of one of the saga's central themes, that love is stronger than the darkest curses. Lupin's own insecurities and Tonks's unwavering devotion provided readers with one of the most bitter-sweet romances in the wizarding world, but on screen, their narrative was barely a whisper, robbing audiences of emotional weight that could have deepened the story. Lupin's character was always marked by tragedy, beginning with his childhood curse of lycanthropy. He lived his life carrying the burden of being a werewolf, hiding from society, and convinced that no one could ever love him once they knew his secret. This self-imposed isolation became central to his hesitation in allowing himself to accept Tonks's affection. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Lupin's torment is clearly described as he tells Harry and the others, "It is the nature of the beast to infect those close to him. I cannot ask her to share that danger." His words reveal both his guilt and his inability to believe he deserves happiness. None of this turmoil appears in the films, which simply introduce Lupin and Tonks as a couple already established, cutting away the struggle that made their bond meaningful. Tonks, on the other hand, was a symbol of defiance against fear and prejudice. A young aura, spirited, clumsy and brave, she embodied resilience. Her love for Lupin was portrayed in the books not as a passing crush, but as a steady flame that refused to be extinguished by his doubts. Readers saw her in moments of visible despair, her normally playful personality dimmed by his rejections. Rowling even used her magical abilities as a metamorphomagus to underline her emotional turmoil, showing that her hair, once vibrant and colourful, dulled to mousy brown when her heart was heavy. In Half-Blood Prince, Molly Weasley's observation made it clear Tonks's very magic was tied to her feelings for Lupin. This subtle but poignant detail never found a place in the films, even though it would have instantly conveyed her heartbreak to viewers without a single line of dialogue. The strength of their storyline lies in how it interwove with the wider war against Voldemort. Lupin's doubts were not just about love, but about the future of children born into a dangerous world. His greatest fear was passing on his curse. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Tonks becomes pregnant, Lupin panics, fleeing from responsibility and joining Harry, Ron, and Hermione on their journey. His escape was not cowardice, but the culmination of years of believing himself unworthy. The books record Harry's furious reaction, a turning point in Lupin's arc. Harry shouts at him, "Parents deserve to give their children a chance at life, not to run away from it." This confrontation forced Lupin to confront the mirror of his own fears, and it led to one of his most crucial decisions, to return to Tonks and embrace fatherhood. The films tragically erased this entire chapter, depriving viewers of one of Lupin's most human struggles. Their relationship was also important because it revealed the cost of prejudice in the wizarding world. Lupin's condition made him an outcast. The Ministry of Magic's laws treated werewolves with suspicion, denying them fair employment and forcing them into poverty. Marrying a werewolf was seen as shameful, almost scandalous. Tonks's willingness to marry Lupin despite this highlighted her bravery, not only in battle, but in the quiet moments of life. Rowling's choice to bring their union into the story was deliberate. It paralleled the idea that love can cross divides of race, blood status, and even curses. The films, by ignoring this, missed an opportunity to show how the wizarding world's prejudices mirrored those of our own, making the story resonate more deeply. One of the most heartbreaking elements in their arc was the arrival of their child, Teddy Lupin. Born while the war still raged, Teddy became a symbol of hope and renewal. Yet his parents' story ended in tragedy, both killed during the Battle of Hogwarts. Rowling crafted this deliberately to echo Harry's own fate as a child, orphaned by Voldemort's war, but given a future shaped by the sacrifices of others. Lupin's last words in the book are haunting. Just before the battle, he tells Harry, "You'll understand someday what it means to fight for the world you want your child to live in." These words carried enormous weight because of his struggles with self-worth and his eventual acceptance of love and responsibility. The films robbed audiences of this moment, cutting their deaths to a silent image on the floor of the Great Hall, leaving their sacrifice underexplored. The decision to omit their deeper narrative is particularly striking when one considers how much the films embraced other romantic subplots. Ron and Hermione's journey received ample attention, as did Harry and Ginny's, albeit briefly, but Lupin and Tonks were left without context, as if their love had no importance. When Tonks reaches for Lupin's hand in Deathly Hallows Part 2 before the final battle, it was a fleeting gesture meant to replace chapters of emotional build-up. Without knowing the struggles they endured, the tragedy of their deaths felt diluted on screen, an afterthought rather than a devastating blow. Tonks's bravery was, in many ways, an unsung heroism. She not only stood by Lupin, but fought alongside the Order of the Phoenix, risking her life again and again. Her arc in the books showed how love could be an act of rebellion, a choice to embrace someone scorned by society. Rowling made it clear that Tonks did not see Lupin's curse as a barrier, but as part of who he was. This choice of unconditional acceptance carried moral weight. In the face of a world obsessed with blood purity and magical superiority, Tonks's devotion stood as a quiet defiance. The films flattened her character into comic relief and a background soldier, never allowing her to embody this deeper defiance. Lupin's eventual acceptance of Tonks's love was not sudden but hard-fought. Readers witnessed his progression from fear to surrender, from shame to pride. This gradual shift made his arc so compelling. His willingness to marry her, stand by her, and welcome their son into the world was a victory as profound as any battle spell. His personal triumph against his inner demons mirrored the larger triumph of the Order against Voldemort. By leaving this development unexplored, the films lost a chance to show that the fight against evil was not only on the battlefield, but also in the heart. The tragedy of their deaths was intensified by the knowledge of what they left behind. Teddy Lupin, like Harry, grew up without parents, a cruel echo of the past repeating itself. Yet where Harry had to face loneliness, Teddy was given a surrogate family through his grandmother Andromeda and the guardianship of Harry himself. The parallel was clear in the books, and it made Lupin and Tonks's sacrifice part of a greater cycle of love and loss. The films, however, skipped over this entirely, leaving audiences unaware of Teddy's existence and erasing the legacy of Lupin and Tonks from the cinematic narrative. Their story was never just about romance. It was about resilience, about challenging the boundaries of fear, and about the courage it takes to embrace life despite its imperfections. In a saga filled with battles, betrayals, and death, Lupin and Tonks provided a thread of hope and humanity. They reminded readers that love is often not convenient or simple, but chosen in defiance of doubt. Rowling gave them a full arc, from struggle to acceptance to sacrifice, but the films stripped them of this power, leaving them as shadows of their literary selves. Even small details in the books enrich their tale in ways the films ignored. For instance, the moment when Lupin finally announces Tonks's pregnancy to Harry is deeply touching, a rare glimpse of joy amid war. He says, "We were afraid, but now we're so happy." These words matter because they show that even someone who spent his life in fear of passing on his curse could find peace in the prospect of fatherhood. The omission of this scene removed one of the few bright lights in the darkness of the final book, diminishing the humanity of Lupin's character. When viewed as a whole, the absence of their arc in the films represents a profound loss, not just for fans, but for the integrity of the story itself. Lupin and Tonks embodied the consequences of war, the cost of prejudice, and the possibility of redemption. Their deaths in the books were not just another tally in the list of casualties, but a deliberate echo of the First War against Voldemort. They symbolized that victory is never without loss, and that love, though fragile, is worth fighting for. Without their full story, the films presented a less complete picture of the sacrifices made to defeat darkness. The Harry Potter films brought magic to life in unforgettable ways, but they faltered in portraying one of the most touching human stories at the heart of the saga. The tragedy is not only that Lupin and Tonks died, but that their struggle to find and hold on to love was never shown in full. Readers of the books carried their memory as one of the most heartbreaking threads woven into the tapestry of the war. Viewers of the films, however, were left with a hollow glimpse, unaware of the depth they had lost. And perhaps that is the greatest disservice, that two of the most quietly courageous characters were denied their rightful place in the story's emotional landscape. Number 20. Peeves' final role in the battle. Of all the characters who never made it into the Harry Potter films, none was more sorely missed than Peeves the poltergeist. In the books, he was not simply a mischievous prankster who haunted the corridors of Hogwarts. He was a force of chaos, embodying the spirit of the school in its wildest and most untamed form. Rowling gave him a role that shifted from comic nuisance to something unexpectedly heroic, especially during the Battle of Hogwarts. The omission of Peeves from the films robbed the story of a powerful moment, one that revealed how even a spirit of disorder could become a protector when the castle he loved was under siege. His contribution, though written with humor, carried symbolic weight that the cinematic adaptation never translated. Throughout the books, Peeves was a constant thorn in the side of teachers and students alike. He hurled water balloons, caused accidents during solemn moments, and delighted in humiliating authority figures. The reader learns early that the only person with any sway over him is the Bloody Baron, the ghost of Slytherin House, who alone could silence him with a glare. For everyone else, whether it was Professor McGonagall, Argus Filch, or even Dumbledore, Peeves was uncontrollable. This history of defiance set the stage for the way his story would culminate. When the final battle came, Peeves's decision to side with Hogwarts was shocking because it demonstrated loyalty from the most unlikely source. Rowling's description of Peeves' actions in the climactic moments of Deathly Hallows provides a burst of wild, almost anarchic energy. While the professors, students, and members of the Order of the Phoenix fought in organized defense, Peeves sowed a different kind of resistance. He swooped down on Death Eaters, sang mocking verses, and created sheer havoc. The The poltergeist, who once seemed to revel in bothering children, was suddenly a weapon against the forces of darkness. His unpredictability became a strategic advantage. After all, how could hardened Death Eaters trained in deadly spells prepare for an enemy who ignored every rule of combat? The tone Rowling used when depicting Peeves during the battle was sharp, almost gleeful. She gave him rhymes that cut through the grim atmosphere with biting humour. One of the most memorable lines came when Harry returned to the Great Hall after Voldemort's defeat. Rowling writes, "And the very last thing he heard, as he hurried toward the door, out into the grounds, was Peeves, who swooped past him, chucking handfuls of chalk into the air, and singing, 'We did it! We bashed them! We Potters the one! And Voldy's gone mouldy, so now let's have fun!'" This image encapsulated Peeves' unique role. He was the voice of unrestrained joy, mocking the fallen tyrant in a way no solemn speech ever could. This moment is more than a comic afterthought. It serves as the perfect capstone to Peeves's presence throughout the series. For 7 books he resisted every attempt at order. He symbolized rebellion against authority, sometimes to the annoyance of the characters we sympathized with. But in the final hour, his defiance found its rightful target. Peeves's laughter and chaos, once disruptive, became weapons of morale. He turned his antics against Voldemort's army, proving that his mischief was not meaningless. The absence of this transformation in the films leaves the narrative poorer, because it erased the poltergeist's transition from nuisance to unlikely ally. Consider how powerful this scene could have been on screen. Imagine the dark halls of Hogwarts under siege, curses flying, walls crumbling, and students huddled together in fear. In the midst of that terror, a figure like Peeves, floating upside down, shrieking rhymes, throwing objects, and mocking Death Eaters, would have injected an unexpected burst of comic defiance. It would have mirrored the resilience of the castle itself, which never lost its spirit even under attack. The audience would have witnessed how even the wildest and most uncontrollable inhabitant of Hogwarts understood the stakes and chose to fight. The choice to remove Peeves entirely from the films is particularly striking because he was, in many ways, the soul of the castle. He was not a ghost with tragic history, like Nearly Headless Nick or Moaning Myrtle. He was not tied to a single house or bound by personal loyalties. He was simply Hogwarts itself, mischievous, unpredictable, and alive. To see him fighting for the school would have been to watch the castle itself rise up against Voldemort. When the films reduced the defense of Hogwarts to professors, students, and magical creatures, they missed the opportunity to show this deeper symbol of the castle's resistance. In the books, Peeves's antics during the battle are described with such vividness that one can almost hear the echoes of laughter above the screams. He threw objects at Death Eaters, disrupted their formations, and generally caused mayhem. His lack of fear made him a peculiar ally. Where humans could be struck down, Peeves, being a poltergeist, could not be destroyed by conventional means. This made him an ideal opponent for the invaders. A curse hurled at him would simply pass through, and yet he would retaliate with an exploding ink bottle or a blinding chalk cloud. His presence made the Death Eaters look foolish, undermining their aura of terror. The significance of Peeves's role also lies in the way it ties into the theme of unity against Voldemort. The Battle of Hogwarts was not won by Harry alone, nor by the professors alone. It was won by the entire school and its allies, students, ghosts, house elves, centaurs, and, yes, Peeves the poltergeist. Rowling emphasized that every part of the castle community contributed. To see Peeves singing triumphantly in the aftermath was to understand that even the agents of chaos had a place in this victory. By contrast, the films streamlined the story into a more conventional fight between good and evil, losing that sense of collective defiance. Another overlooked element is how Peeves's actions provided catharsis for the reader. After chapters of mounting dread and devastating losses, Fred Weasley's death, Tonks and Lupin's deaths, Colin Creevey's lifeless body, the sudden eruption of Peeves's song offered relief. It was not disrespectful. It was a release of tension, a reminder that joy had survived. In his mocking verse, Peeves distilled the triumph into a single, unforgettable image. Voldemort, reduced to nothing, mocked by the spirit who had never bowed to anyone. The films, however, ended the battle with silence and solemnity, missing that final spark of irreverent celebration. It is worth recalling that Peeves was originally intended to appear in the first film. Actor Rick Mayall was even cast in the role, and scenes were filmed before being cut. Mayall himself later remarked with humor that his children were disappointed when they discovered his part had been removed. This decision, made for the sake of pacing and tone, meant that Peeves was erased from the cinematic universe entirely. By the time the filmmakers reached the Battle of Hogwarts, there was no way to reintroduce him. The loss of this character arc was sealed in the earliest choices of adaptation. For readers who cherished Peeves, his absence from the screen feels like a missing heartbeat in the story. His mischief was not simply background noise, it was part of the texture of life at Hogwarts. He reminded us that magic was not just dangerous or wondrous, but also ridiculous and unpredictable. Without him, the films presented a more sanitized vision of the castle, one where the corridors were haunted only by sadness or menace, not by laughter. And when the final battle came, they lacked the surprising joy of seeing mischief weaponized against tyranny. There is also something deeply symbolic about the way Peeves contributed. Unlike the professors, he had no duty. Unlike the students, he had no stake in the future. Unlike the Order, he had no ideology. He was chaos incarnate, yet he chose a side. That choice mattered because it showed that even the most disruptive elements of the magical world understood the danger Voldemort posed. Peeves did not need to be persuaded or commanded. He acted because Hogwarts was his playground, and he would not allow it to be conquered. This transformation from anarchic nuisance to defender of the school was one of Rowling's subtle but powerful narrative touches. Ultimately, Peeves's exclusion from the films represents more than the loss of a funny scene. It stripped the Battle of Hogwarts of one of its most vibrant and unexpected allies. It removed a moment of levity that balanced the tragedy, and it silenced a character whose final song echoed the resilience of a community that fought together. In the book, Peeves gave voice to victory with his rhyme, a reminder that Voldemort's reign of fear was shattered not only by solemn heroes, but also by laughter. In the films, this voice was never heard, and the absence continues to feel like a missed opportunity to honor the chaotic heart of Hogwarts. Number 21. Albus Dumbledore's Youth and Gellert Grindelwald. Albus Dumbledore was never just the wise old headmaster who guided Harry Potter from the shadows. He was once a young man filled with fire, ambition, and dangerous dreams. The films reduced him to a mentor figure who occasionally offered cryptic advice, but the books by J.K. Rowling revealed a youth marked by mistakes, loss, and a haunting past. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling uncovers a story that reshapes everything readers thought they knew about Dumbledore. His brilliance, his hunger for greatness, and the tragedy that followed him are keys to understanding why he hesitated to act with the decisiveness people expected in the fight against Voldemort. Without these elements, the cinematic portrayal left his character incomplete, a shadow of what he truly was. The truth begins in Godric's Hollow, where the Dumbledore family carried wounds unseen by the world. Percival Dumbledore, Albus's father, had attacked Muggle boys after they assaulted his daughter Ariana, whose uncontrolled magical outburst made her both powerful and vulnerable. For this crime, Percival was imprisoned in Azkaban, leaving his family dishonored. Ariana's mother, Kendra, moved them in hopes of hiding the girl's condition, for Ariana could not control her magic. Albus, brilliant and promising, was burdened with responsibility far too soon. This backstory, described in The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore by Rita Skeeter, is pivotal, for it frames the guilt and duty that shaped him. The films chose to omit it, but it is the foundation of Dumbledore's internal conflict. Rowling shows how the young Albus once dreamed of power, not simply knowledge. When he met Gellert Grindelwald, a wizard of extraordinary charisma and intellect, their bond was immediate. Together, they envisioned a new order for the magical world, a plan centered around the greater good. Grindelwald spoke of wizard dominance over Muggles, claiming it would prevent future persecutions. Albus, fascinated and blinded by admiration, agreed. "For the greater good" became their shared phrase, later carved by Grindelwald on Durmstrang's walls. Readers encounter this chilling revelation through Aberforth Dumbledore's bitter accusations in Deathly Hallows. "You never saw her, did you? All you saw was the glory." This single sentence unmasks the arrogance of youth that led Albus into his greatest mistake. The summer of friendship between Albus and Gellert was electric with possibility. They stayed up late, planning revolutions, dreaming of artifacts like the Deathly Hallows. Grindelwald spoke passionately of the Elder Wand, the unbeatable weapon. Albus was enthralled, his intellect finding a mirror in Gellert's ambition. This portrayal of Dumbledore is crucial. He was not merely a moral sage, but once tempted by visions of control. Rowling's account forces readers to reconsider the headmaster's every hesitation. The man who later urged Harry to avoid power was once nearly consumed by it himself. This powerful irony was left untouched in the films, depriving audiences of an essential understanding of his character. The tragedy that followed was the turning point of his life. Ariana, fragile and unable to control her bursts of magic, was caught in the storm of Albus and Gellert's plans. Aberforth, the younger brother, confronted them, furious that Albus had abandoned family duty for dangerous dreams. A duel erupted, 3 wands clashing in anger, love, and ambition. Ariana, in the wrong place at the wrong time, was struck by a spell. She died instantly. The books never specify whose spell killed her, and that uncertainty is the knife that remained lodged in Albus's soul. "It was our fault," he admitted years later, "whether mine or Gellert's, I do not know." This guilt haunted him forever, a detail absent in the cinematic version, which never showed why Dumbledore avoided fighting Grindelwald for so long. The duel shattered more than a family. Grindelwald fled, pursuing his dark dreams abroad. Aberforth, devastated and enraged, attacked Albus at Ariana's funeral, breaking his brother's nose in front of the congregation. From that moment, Albus carried 2 burdens: guilt for Ariana's death and estrangement from his only surviving sibling. The films offered hints of mystery but no depth. They never allowed viewers to witness how the loss of his sister paralyzed Albus, how it chained his hands whenever war demanded ruthless choices. Rowling's narrative explains why Dumbledore hesitated with Voldemort. He had once chosen ambition over family, and the result was death. He would not make the same mistake again. This silence around Ariana's death became a defining trait. Dumbledore, who so often counseled Harry about facing the truth, could not face his own. He avoided absolute power, fearing what he might become if tempted again. In Deathly Hallows, he confessed to Harry, "I was fit to gain the Elder Wand, but not to wield it. I was afraid of power, afraid of myself." This vulnerability makes him human, not a flawless chess master. Yet the films omitted it, leaving audiences with a mentor figure who seemed manipulative rather than tragically self-aware. The depth of his caution, his reluctance to kill, and his tendency to let others act in his place all stemmed from the weight of Ariana's shadow. The irony is that Dumbledore's greatest duel, his legendary confrontation with Grindelwald in 1945, loses much of its emotional weight without this context. To the films, it was simply the meeting of 2 powerful wizards, an event referenced but never explored. To readers, it was the culmination of decades of regret. Albus finally faced the friend he had once loved and the ideology he had once shared. When he defeated Grindelwald, it was not just victory for the wizarding world, it was atonement for Ariana's death. Without this history, the duel becomes legend without soul, a hollow tale instead of a personal reckoning. The omission also undermines the parallel between Dumbledore and Harry. Rowling's narrative draws a deliberate connection. Both are young men burdened by family tragedy, tempted by dangerous power, and forced to choose love over ambition. Harry's rejection of the Deathly Hallows mirrors Albus's realization decades earlier. By hiding Dumbledore's past, the films robbed viewers of seeing how their stories intertwined. It reduced Harry's journey to a battle of good versus evil instead of a continuation of lessons his mentor had painfully learned. The absence of Grindelwald's story in the main films also flattened the complexity of magical history. Viewers saw Voldemort as the ultimate evil, but Rowling's world contained another Dark Lord who once nearly reshaped wizarding society. Grindelwald's defeat was not just background, it was a warning of how close the wizarding world came to dictatorship decades earlier. Dumbledore's involvement in this chapter explains his global reputation, his hesitation, and his eventual mastery of humility. The films only hinted at Grindelwald in passing, making the entire history of the Elder Wand feel disconnected and rushed. The storytelling choice to silence this history also altered how audiences perceived Dumbledore's death. In Half-Blood Prince, his calm acceptance of Draco's wand and his final words to Snape, "Severus, please," carry more weight when one knows his fear of power and guilt over Ariana. He trusted Snape to finish what he could not because he was manipulative, but because he recognized his limits. The omission of his past robbed this moment of resonance, reducing it to a clever plot rather than a final act of humility from a man once blinded by ambition. Even Rita Skeeter's scandalous book, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, served a critical purpose in Rowling's narrative. It forced Harry and the readers to question whether their idol was truly good. The revelations about Grindelwald, Ariana, and Albus's youthful arrogance shattered the illusion of the perfect mentor. Yet in facing these truths, Harry chose to continue trusting him, recognizing that greatness and flaw can coexist. This nuance was completely absent in the films, which never asked audiences to wrestle with Dumbledore's moral complexity. Instead, he remained a distant figure, untarnished and incomplete. The richness of Dumbledore's backstory lies in its contradictions. He was brilliant but flawed, loving yet blind, powerful but afraid of power. These contradictions explain his choices, his silences, and his strategies. They also make his mentorship of Harry profoundly moving. When he warns Harry about the danger of seeking the Hallows or the temptation of power, he is not preaching from a pedestal. He is confessing, through advice, the scars of his own past. Rowling gave readers this intricate portrait, but the films denied audiences the chance to see it unfold on screen. Ultimately, the young Albus Dumbledore's story is not simply a missing subplot, it is the key that unlocks the heart of the series. Without it, viewers are left with a wise old man whose actions sometimes seem manipulative. With it, readers see a flawed human being who once lost everything to ambition and spent the rest of his life ensuring others would not repeat his mistake. The omission of this history left a silence at the core of the films, a silence filled only by the pages of Rowling's books, where the tragedy of Ariana, the fire of Grindelwald, and the burden of guilt gave shape to the most enigmatic wizard of them all. Number 22. Gilderoy Lockhart's Fate. Of all the characters who appeared in J.K. Rowling's world, few were as flamboyant and simultaneously as tragic as Gilderoy Lockhart. Readers first encountered him in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, where his vanity, endless self-promotion, and ludicrous incompetence made him a source of comic relief. He strutted through the corridors of Hogwarts boasting about his supposed accomplishments, from defeating banshees to confronting werewolves, always with a smile and a signed photograph ready. Yet what made Lockhart remarkable in the novels was not merely his humour, but the deeper tragedy behind his persona, something the films brushed aside. His disappearance after the second movie left viewers with a flattened caricature, while readers discovered that his arc carried a far more haunting message about the dangers of living only for fame. The truth about Lockhart's career was revealed gradually in the book. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione pressed him, they uncovered that he had not performed any of the heroic acts described in his best-selling books. Instead, he had stolen other wizards' and witches' stories, erased their memories, and marketed those triumphs as his own. Rowling paints this revelation with chilling simplicity. Lockhart admits, "It's not nearly as simple as that. When I was younger, I wanted to be famous. I knew I was good at memory charm, so I just borrowed the work of others." That confession strips away the glitter of his image and exposes him as a hollow man whose entire identity was built on deception. The films reduced this complexity, treating him as a buffoon whose cowardice was amusing, but whose inner emptiness remained largely hidden. What makes Lockhart's story compelling is the arc that unfolds after his downfall in the Chamber of Secrets. During the disastrous attempt to erase Harry and Ron's memories, his own spell backfired, leaving him with near total amnesia. In the books, this was not the end of his presence in the wizarding world. Rowling did not simply cast him aside as a one-time joke. She returned to him in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry, Hermione, Ron, Ginny, and the Weasley parents visited Arthur Weasley at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. There, in one of the most memorable side episodes, they encountered Lockhart once more, no longer the glittering celebrity, but a broken man scribbling his name over and over on scraps of paper, practicing autographs for admirers who would never come. That scene in St. Mungo's was not played for laughs. It was devastating in its irony. The man who had lived for the adoration of others was now incapable of remembering even his closest acquaintances. He beamed when Harry entered the ward, offering him an autographed photo, entirely unaware that Harry was the boy who had exposed him. The narrator describes, "He looked very pleased with himself. His smile beamed as he thrust a picture toward Harry. Just like old times, eh?" This detail transformed Lockhart from comic relief into a tragic figure, stripped of everything except the empty gestures of the fame he had once craved. His mind clung to the shallow ritual of self-promotion, while the substance of his life had evaporated. The films chose not to include this episode, and in doing so, they erased one of Rowling's sharpest commentaries on celebrity culture. Lockhart's fate was not meant only as punishment for his deceit, it was a reflection on what happens when a person defines themselves entirely by reputation. In a world where fame was already a theme, Harry himself being a reluctant celebrity from infancy, Lockhart represented the opposite side of the spectrum, someone who pursued recognition at all costs and lost his soul in the process. Without St. Mungo's, film audiences never saw the completion of this parable. They were left with the impression of a silly fraud who got his comeuppance, rather than a once promising wizard whose vanity left him hollow. Lockhart's family, as revealed briefly in the hospital visit, added another layer of poignancy. His mother visited occasionally, bringing him trinkets and speaking to the staff about his condition. She was proud, but her pride was now misplaced, for she clung to the image of the famous son who had vanished long before the accident. "He still likes signing photographs," she explained, as if this pathetic habit was proof that some remnant of his old glory remained. This small exchange underscored the cruelty of fame. Even when it collapsed, it left behind traces that family members struggled to reconcile. Instead of a decorated hero, Lockhart had become a patient whose only skill was a meaningless gesture. The hospital scene also mattered for the younger characters. For Harry, Hermione, and Ron, it was a reminder of how deceptive appearances could be. Hermione, who once admired Lockhart and collected his books with enthusiasm, saw with her own eyes the emptiness of his existence. Ron, who had long mocked Lockhart's vanity, was confronted with the human wreckage left behind when illusions were stripped away. Harry himself, constantly burdened by unwanted fame, could not miss the irony. Here was a man who had craved recognition, who had built his identity upon it, and who now existed only as a shadow of that craving. The unspoken lesson was clear: fame alone was not worth living for. There was also a symbolic resonance in Lockhart's fate. In mythology and literature, memory often represents identity and truth. Lockhart's obsession with erasing others' memories was his weapon for building a false identity. When his own memory was destroyed, it was as though the universe itself had balanced the scales. The very magic he abused became his downfall. Rowling's choice to leave him permanently incapacitated rather than redeeming him reinforced the severity of his crime. He had stolen other people's lives to manufacture his reputation, and now he lived in a fog where he had no life of his own. The absence of this symbolism in the films weakened the narrative's richness. By abandoning Lockhart after Chamber of Secrets, the films missed the opportunity to show continuity in Rowling's world. Readers could see how characters who had once loomed large returned in unexpected places, reshaped by time and circumstance. Just as Neville Longbottom grew from timid boy to war hero, Lockhart shrank from dazzling celebrity to hospital patient. Both arcs emphasized that people were not static, and that choices had long-term consequences. The cinematic omission flattened this theme, leaving Lockhart as a forgotten punchline rather than a cautionary tale. Even within the brief passages at St. Mungo's, Rowling infused Lockhart with unsettling humanity. He was not a villain in the traditional sense, but neither was he entirely innocent. His amnesia made him harmless, even pitiable, but it also ensured that he could never confront or repent for his deceit. This paradox made him memorable, a man punished so thoroughly that he could not even comprehend his punishment. For readers, this evoked unease. Was it justice, or was it cruelty? Did he deserve to suffer endlessly without awareness, or was that simply fate's ironic answer to his hubris? Such moral questions vanished entirely in the adaptation to screen. Lockhart's books, mentioned throughout the series, also served as reminders of his legacy. Magical Me, Gadding with Ghouls, Voyages with Vampires, titles once used to build his legend, now stood as monuments to lies. Hermione's collection of signed copies became relics of a youthful crush on celebrity. In Order of the Phoenix, when she saw Lockhart again, those books must have seemed absurd, a reminder of how easily people can be fooled by charm and publicity. This reflection on gullibility and the culture of fame enriched the themes of the series, emphasizing that not all deception came from dark wizards like Voldemort. Sometimes it came from the smiling face on a book cover. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of Lockhart's arc is that, unlike other flawed characters, he was denied growth. Draco Malfoy found redemption in small ways, Snape's bitterness was revealed to mask love, even Pettigrew showed a fleeting moment of hesitation. Lockhart had no such chance. His mind was permanently fractured, leaving him incapable of change. He was trapped in the shallow shell of himself, endlessly rehearsing for fans who no longer existed. For readers, this permanence served as a chilling reminder. Not every character is granted redemption. Some mistakes are so entwined with one's identity that they consume it. The films, however, chose laughter over tragedy. Kenneth Branagh's performance was brilliant, capturing Lockhart's vanity with wit and charm, but the script stopped at caricature. When he vanished from the story after the second film, audiences might have assumed he was simply written out, irrelevant to the larger struggle against Voldemort. In truth, his fate offered a mirror to Harry's own relationship with fame and to the series' exploration of identity. To cut it was to cut one of Rowling's sharpest social commentaries. It is worth considering how Lockhart's inclusion in Order of the Phoenix could have enriched the cinematic narrative. Amid the chaos of the hospital, amid the despair of seeing Arthur Weasley injured, a glimpse of Lockhart's smiling ruin would have deepened the atmosphere. It would have underscored that not all tragedies in the wizarding world came from war or dark curses. Some came from within, from vanity, from deception, from the emptiness of living without truth. The absence of this reminder made the films less layered, less haunting, less true to Rowling's intricate design. Lockhart remains, in the pages of the books, one of the series' most quietly devastating figures. Beneath the glitter and self-promotion lay a cautionary tale about the fragility of identity, the cruelty of fame, and the consequences of dishonesty. His erasure from the films deprived viewers of that depth. Readers who encountered him again in St. Mungo's, however, never forgot the image. A once celebrated author, smiling vacantly, pen in hand, offering an autograph that no one wanted. It was a scene that transformed laughter into silence, amusement into reflection. In the end, Lockhart's tragedy was not that he was forgotten by others, but that he forgot himself. Number 23. Peter Pettigrew's death. Of all the overlooked storylines in the Harry Potter films, none feels as hollow as the conclusion given to Peter Pettigrew. In J.K. Rowling's books, his arc closes with a dark, poetic justice that highlights the themes of loyalty, betrayal, and the inescapable weight of one's choices. Pettigrew, once the cowardly friend who betrayed James and Lily Potter to Voldemort, meets his end not at the wand of an enemy, but at the hand of his own magical gift, a silver hand crafted by Voldemort himself. In the films, however, this moment is stripped away, replaced with a hurried, ambiguous death that robs the story of its symbolic resonance. When compared, the gap between the two portrayals is jarring, almost as though the moral of his arc was left unfinished on screen. Pettigrew's role in the story has always been one of quiet importance. He is the one who delivers Harry's parents into Voldemort's hands, yet he also inadvertently sets into motion Harry's eventual survival. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, his true identity is revealed when Sirius Black and Remus Lupin force him to resume his human form. Harry stops them from killing him, declaring, "I don't reckon my dad would have wanted his best friends to become killers just for you." This act of mercy becomes crucial, for Voldemort later uses Pettigrew to return to power. The cycle of betrayal and survival that follows makes his final downfall in the books not just a death scene, but a thematic resolution. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Rowling crafts this end with a sense of inevitability. Pettigrew captures Harry, Ron, and Hermione at Malfoy Manor, but in the chaos of their escape, he hesitates. For the first time since his betrayal of the Potters, he falters in his loyalty to Voldemort. When Harry reminds him of the mercy shown years earlier, there is a moment, a flicker of humanity that weakens him. The Silver Hand, enchanted by Voldemort, recognizes this as a betrayal. It turns against him, tightening around his throat. The book describes it chillingly. His own silver fingers were moving inexorably toward his own throat. The metal strangled him, silenced him. It is an end both grotesque and fitting, as if Voldemort's gift was always meant to be his executioner. The tragedy of this scene lies not in Pettigrew's death, but in what it represents. His demise illustrates that loyalty built on fear is fragile, and that even the faintest shadow of compassion can undo a life built on cowardice and treachery. Pettigrew is not redeemed. His act of hesitation is far too small, far too late, but he is punished by the very darkness to which he surrendered. The symbolic beauty of the moment cannot be overstated. It reminds the reader that Voldemort's gifts are never true rewards, only curses waiting to reveal themselves. The Silver Hand was a trap from the start, a tool to ensure that Pettigrew's servitude could never waver without consequence. By contrast, but the films present his end almost as an afterthought. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, Part 1, Pettigrew is present during the events at Malfoy Manor, but when Harry and his friends escape, his death is barely shown. There is no silver hand closing on his throat, no dark justice playing out on screen. Instead, the scene cuts away with the suggestion that he was knocked unconscious or killed in the scuffle. The audience is left without explanation, and the story loses its sharp, moral edge. What should have been a haunting lesson in betrayal and fear becomes a muddled, forgettable moment. His character arc, built carefully through several books, collapses without resolution. This omission has consequences beyond the single character. Pettigrew's fate ties into one of the story's central themes, the weight of choice. Throughout the series, Rowling stresses that choices define who we are far more than abilities or circumstances. Harry chooses mercy, even when Pettigrew deserves none. Pettigrew later chooses hesitation, however small. Those decisions create ripples, culminating in his downfall. In removing his book-accurate death, the films sever that chain. Without it, Harry's mercy in the third story feels less significant, as if it never mattered. The irony that Harry's compassion planted the seed of Pettigrew's destruction vanishes entirely. One cannot help but notice how much was lost in atmosphere as well. In the book, the moment is tense, claustrophobic, filled with the echo of destiny. The dungeon of Malfoy Manor becomes the stage for Pettigrew's undoing, the metallic fingers reflecting torchlight as they tighten. Readers can almost hear the gasp, the choking sound, the horror of an enchanted hand turning against its owner. Rowling makes it unforgettable because it feels both cruel and fair, a punishment not delivered by an external enemy, but by Pettigrew's own choices. In film, none of this texture remains. The visuals could have heightened the dread, but instead they reduce it to nothing. Thematically, Pettigrew's book ending also reinforces Voldemort's nature as a master who offers nothing but destruction. Every follower, no matter how loyal, faces eventual ruin. Bellatrix Lestrange dies screaming for him. Severus Snape is murdered by his command. Pettigrew dies because even his faintest lapse is intolerable. Each death reveals the rot at the heart of Voldemort's rule. Loyalty is met not with reward but with doom. Leaving Pettigrew's end so vague in the films removes one piece of this larger mosaic. Viewers do not see how completely Voldemort devours his own. There is also a deep psychological layer to consider. Pettigrew's life is defined by cowardice. From his school days, he clung to stronger friends like Sirius and James, seeking safety in their shadow. Later, he hides under Voldemort's wing, never brave enough to stand alone. When he hesitates at Malfoy Manor, it is not bravery that stops him, but habit, a reflex of weakness, a memory of the boy who once depended on others. The hand strangulation becomes the final proof that cowardice cannot protect forever. In narrative terms, it is poetic irony. The man who always sought safety is killed by the very gift meant to secure it. Quotes from the text amplify this meaning. Rowling writes, "For a moment Harry thought Pettigrew might have meant to spare him, but then the hand Voldemort had given him, closed upon its master's throat. The phrasing underlines that the hand is Voldemort's possession, not Pettigrew's. He was never free. His life belonged to the Dark Lord from the moment he accepted the gift. This is where the film's neglect becomes glaring. Without this chilling detail, Pettigrew's entire tragedy is diminished. He becomes just another nameless casualty in the chaos, stripped of the cautionary weight his arc carried." For fans of the books, this omission remains one of the most disappointing alterations. Adaptations always trim details, but Pettigrew's fate was not a minor subplot. It was the culmination of threads woven since the third book, a payoff to Harry's choice of mercy, and a symbolic warning about the price of cowardice. Leaving it untold on screen is not simply cutting for time, it is cutting away meaning. The viewer who only knows the films never learns why Pettigrew mattered at all, beyond being a trembling side character. His betrayal is remembered, but his punishment is forgotten. In storytelling, endings matter. They give shape to arcs, closure to journeys, and clarity to themes. Pettigrew's book ending delivered all of this. It was cruel but earned, brief but unforgettable. It ensured that his betrayal was not only remembered, but answered. The films chose instead to let him fade without justice, and in doing so they denied the audience one of the saga's clearest moral lessons. The coward's death at the hand of his own fear-forged gift was the natural close of his story. Without it he remains suspended, an incomplete shadow in a tale otherwise so meticulous about tying fate to choice. In the end, Peter Pettigrew's story is a reminder of how much detail can shape meaning. His death in the book stands as one of the series' most striking illustrations of consequence, while the films leave a hollow space where that lesson should have been. For those who read, the silver hand remains unforgettable, a symbol of betrayal turned inward, of mercy turned against the undeserving. For those who watched, it is almost as though the rat simply scurried away, erased from memory. The difference is profound, and it shows why faithful attention to such details matters when retelling a story built on the weight of choices. Number 24. Dumbledore's Army Resistance in Hogwarts. Under the shadows of war, when the wizarding world was collapsing into fear and submission, Hogwarts remained a battleground more alive than the films ever allowed us to see. In J.K. Rowling's books, the continuation of Dumbledore's army, after the events of the Triwizard Tournament, transformed into one of the most striking threads of resistance. It was not a classroom club anymore. It became a clandestine rebellion that carried the spirit of defiance into every corridor, every common room, and every hidden passage of the ancient castle. The films reduced this movement to flashes of practice sessions in the Room of Requirement and a symbolic stand during the final battle, but the novels carved it as a revolution within the school itself. Without Harry, Neville Longbottom, Ginny Weasley, and Luna Lovegood stepped into leadership, shaping the DA into a fortress of courage against tyranny. When Voldemort seized control of the Ministry and placed Severus Snape as the official headmaster, the outward appearance of order masked a system rotting from within. The Carrows, Alecto, and Amicus, installed as instructors, turned classrooms into chambers of propaganda and cruelty. Alecto taught Muggle studies not as a subject of curiosity, but as a venomous distortion, insisting that Muggles were, like animals, stupid and dirty. Amicus oversaw defense against the dark arts, twisted into lessons of the dark arts themselves, forcing students to practice the Cruciatus Curse on their peers. In the book Harry Potter and the Deathly, Hallows Neville recounts this dissent. They used to punish us by forcing us to torture first years. If you refused, they did it to you instead. These words reveal a level of horror that the films glanced over, muting the desperation that shaped the DA's continued existence. The Room of Requirement became more than a hidden classroom for charms and jinxes. It evolved into a sanctuary of survival. In the books, when Neville became the main figure of resistance, the room reshaped itself to provide safety, food, and shelter for those who could not bear to go back to their dormitories after punishments. It mirrored the collective determination of the students. "It's been really important for us," Neville tells Harry when he returns. "We've lost count of how many nights we've slept in here." The Carrows couldn't get in. The films only give us brief glimpses of Neville emerging from shadows, but in truth, he was living a double life as both fugitive and leader, guiding younger students in secret meetings, keeping the flame of Dumbledore's army alive when darkness pressed on every side. Neville's transformation is one of the most powerful arcs buried under the spectacle of the movies. The shy boy who once stumbled over his words became the face of rebellion within Hogwarts. In the absence of Harry, Ron, and Hermione, Neville raised his wand not only against the Carrows but also against despair. He was beaten, tortured, even hunted inside his own school, yet he did not collapse. "They've tried to make an example of me plenty of times, and he confesses in the books, his scars proof of resistance. His persistence inspired others who had felt abandoned by the heroes who vanished in search of Horcruxes. To the students trapped in a prison disguised as a school, Neville was a reminder that they were not powerless. Ginny Weasley's role in this rebellion is another piece that the films muted into near invisibility. In Deathly Hallows, we learn how Ginny, alongside Neville and Luna, attempted to steal the sword of Gryffindor from Snape's office, a daring act that showed not only courage but also her willingness to carry Harry's fight in his absence. Though the attempt failed and punishments followed, this episode painted Ginny as more than Harry's love interest. She was a warrior in her own right, fueling the DA's operations and inspiring younger students to be the regime. The films neglected this moment, reducing her to background presence, while the books painted her as a fiery leader who burned as brightly as her hair in the darkness of occupied Hogwarts. Luna Lovegood's contribution, too, is underestimated by the cinematic adaptation. While she is kidnapped halfway through the school year, her earlier involvement in organizing and encouraging DA members created a balance between Neville's grounded determination and Ginny's bold fire. Luna's whimsical courage offered a kind of hope that transcended strategy. Her very nature reminded others of the values they were fighting for. In the book, her absence is felt like a wound, and her return during the Battle of Hogwarts brings a sense of completeness. The DA was never about one leader, but about the interwoven bravery of individuals who refused to surrender their humanity. The DA's acts of sabotage against the Carrows were not minor pranks, but calculated defiance. Graffiti appeared on walls, Dumbledore's army still recruiting. The rebellious slogans carried a psychological power, echoing through the school like whispers of freedom. Students smuggled food into the room of requirement, healed each other's wounds with rudimentary spells, and organized secret lessons to counter the poison of official classes. These details gave Hogwarts the pulse of a resistance cell, one that functioned within enemy territory. The films skipped these crucial notes, presenting instead a passive Hogwarts awaiting rescue rather than a community already fighting from within. The Carrows' cruelty escalated to open brutality, and the DA's opposition grew sharper in response. One striking example comes when Amicus attempts to force students to perform the Cruciatus Curse on those who opposed him. Neville refused. He bore the curse himself, writhing under its pain, but he never relented. This moment, described in Deathly Hallows, marks the solidification of Neville's leadership. It was not his wand work that defined him, but his refusal to bend. He became a leader not through ambition, but through endurance, showing that leadership is born when someone chooses to suffer for others. The Room of Requirement, beyond being a refuge, became the headquarters of this underground movement. Its enchanted doors remained closed to enemies, transforming into a realm where DA members could breathe freely, practice spells, and remember who they were fighting for. It became a parallel Hogwarts, the Hogwarts of Dumbledore, hidden behind the walls of the corrupted Hogwarts under Voldemort. The contrast is staggering, a school divided into two realities, one ruled by fear and the other by resilience. The films portray the room as a convenient plot device, but the books elevated it into the symbol of unyielding spirit, a stronghold that carried the heartbeat of revolution.